to fear. Fear itself.
No. Be afraid. Be very afraid.
There's nothing to fear except God. Whatever that means to you.
Do I look like someone who cares what God thinks? I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Why do I say this? Because we got Holy Ghost power.
You're listening to a podcast exploring faith and fear, what scares us and what saves us. This is the fear of God. Hello, and welcome back to the Fear of God podcast. Welcome to week 3 of our look at some of your listener-voted top 10 horror films of 2019. 2 weeks ago, we covered Todd Phillips's Joker that went on to earn Joaquin Phoenix a Best Actor Oscar. Last week, like some rock upside the head, we dove deep on Bong Joon-ho's 6-time nominated, 4-time Oscar-winning, including Best Picture and Director, Parasite. This week, we will be venturing into the Swedish countryside for a dance around the Maypole with Ari Aster's sun-drenched breakup film wrapped in a bear suit, Midsommar. Speaking to you right now is one of your hosts, Nathan Rouse, and typically with me, as you all know, is fellow co-host Reed Lackey, but he was here a minute ago, and he mentioned that he just needed to go get his meat pies out of the oven. You know, I don't know. Maybe it's a mid-podcast recording snack or something. New year, new things, I guess. He'll be back, hopefully. While we wait on Reed, I did want to welcome, as promised last week, special guest and Fear of God literary correspondent, Meridith Curran. Meridith, welcome back to the show.
Hello, thank you.
You are very welcome. We are glad for you to be here. I don't know if you came hungry, but Reed is going to distribute some meat pies pretty soon. So, you know, we'll see.
Cool.
I mean, I just ate a little while ago. It is, we've got to remember Reed is on, you know, California time. So it's like dinner time proper for him. So it makes a little sense. But Meridith, as you know, here at the Fear of God, we explore the holy and the horrific at the intersection of faith and fear, dissecting what scares us in order to find what saves us. Listeners, if that sounds like something you'd enjoy, come find us on Twitter, on Instagram, or join us in the Facebook group for lively discussions around horror and genre-themed media, books, and film. At the Fear of God, we explore, we don't explain, except for right now, when I'm going to explain that you can listen to the Fear of God podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Overcast, CastBox, and also, lest we forget, thanks to Fear of God continuity guru Steve Beckley, you can also find us on our recently refreshed Letterboxd page. So come over there for all the lists you could ever want. Reed knows lists. He'll tell us all about them in a few minutes. Do you know where we're not featured? Because we don't. If there's a podcast platform that we're not aware of that you're on or know about, let us know. You can do that by going to thefearofgodpodcast.com, go to the contact page, and shoot us a little contact email thing. And while you're at it, go subscribe to us on your favorite platform and leave us a 5-star rating or glowing review. As mentioned, if you're just now catching up to us this year for some reason, thefearofgodpodcast.com is your new home and our new home for all things foggy. See fellow foggers in their Fear of God merch. Speaking of merch, do yourself a favor. Meridith, you have some merch. I know that.
Do.
You're on there. Go click on the merch button to make a merch perch. You can find art from the Fear of God on t-shirts, mugs, cell phone cases, pillows. We also have the one and only Reed. Hey, buddy, you're back. And oh my gosh, those smell delicious.
In the första hörste börste för löfte meste meat pie, lite vörste med för midsommar. Easter verste meat pie, verste no swinging dingy, no, verste nästa för löfte do.
What?
I didn't know the shringadingy was a Swedish chef specialty, you know.
Where's she?
Oh my God.
That with the
So-
yogi.
Yeah?
This year.
Okay, hey, Swedish Chef, I appreciate all the hard work you put in. Clearly, Reed had some help on these meat pies. If you don't mind,
Good morning.
go. Goodness gracious, we need the Swedish Chef to go get Reed back because I've watched Midsommar twice, but I really don't speak a lick of Swedish, so I don't. This is going to be a really odd conversation. Reed,
That's okay.
Hey.
I don't think
Hey, buddy.
Swedish Chef speaks a lick of Swedish either. So, so there's that.
Now, see, the phrase Swedish Chef speaks a lick of Swedish, like that's like a tongue twister right there.
It
We
is.
should start using that as our recording, like our little thing we do before we record, just to make sure we're loosened up and ready to
Swedish
go.
Chef doesn't speak
Swedish
a
Chef
lick-
doesn't speak a lick of
See,
English.
I've already failed
Swedish.
it. I've already
Swedish. See, right.
Yes.
Reed.
Hi, buddy.
Welcome from the kitchen. We appreciate your hard work, although it sounds like you may have had some
I had
some help.
Yes, I had help.
Okay, good. Well, Reed, I did want to remind oh my God. I did want to remind everyone that you and I are in you are my running mate for this election year. And I don't know if you heard,
Indeed.
Meredith, this may be news to you as well, that the New Hampshire Democratic primaries just happened. And Reed, we won.
We won? We won again?
We won. We are gaining steam.
I still
we
didn't
are
even go.
making it happen.
Wow. It's
Well, it's just we got good representation. We got boots on the ground.
Oh, I
you know?
see. I see.
And Meredith, you remember, as previously suggested on Instagram when we debuted Jacob's 2020 art, you are our Secretary of Education. Or will be when we
right.
fully get elected. 'Cause,
Wow.
Don't worry, Meredith, if the role intimidates you, I promise you already know more than our
Oh boy.
Secretary of Education. So yeah, we are on our way
I'll take it.
to good. Thank you. We will gladly let you have it. We're on our way to a big Fear of God year. Speaking of Fear of God, this year, hey Reed, we have informally begun and will formally in 2 weeks begin our new Umbrella series 2020.
So
If listeners want the dish on that, they can go listen to the 2020 pre-cap from a few weeks ago where we dive deep on what that series is and means. But there is something we need listeners to do. And Reed, I'm going to let you tell them. And
Okay.
I did just call you Reed, but just as a callback, I did, last week I tried to conjure a nickname for you because of your list skills.
Right. Yes.
And, you're about to ask for something real specific relative to list making. And so I did come up with a nickname for you. So
okay.
I am going to turn this segment over to Lackey the Listicle, my occasionally listless list-making lackey.
Oh,
You want to talk about tongue twisters? Wow. Say it again, please. I'm writing it down.
Okay. Reed, you are now, for this segment, Lackey the Listicle, my occasionally listless list-making lackey.
That's it. Oh, that's a.
So see, I use the proper noun lackey, proper name lackey.
You did
and
a lot
the
there. Yes.
Right, the very improper name lackey version, right?
Yes, it's
so,
true.
So why don't you tell us?
I
yes,
embrace it. I embrace this new
Lackey the
moniker.
Listicle.
That is exciting. So
I like it.
yes. So far less complicated than Nathan saying my new nickname is you going to thefearofgodpodcast.com, clicking on the very top banner, which will take you to the 2020 splash page. There you will find, at present, 6 surveys for the years 2000 through 2005. Listeners, if you have not already gone and cast your votes for the year 2000, this is your last chance. The survey will close after the release of this episode, so we're going to give it another day or two, and then we're going to close that down. So time is of the essence. But you still have several other years that you can go and can examine. You can vote on any of those years. We are going to be entering into an umbrella series where we count down your favorite top 10 horror films of each year, starting with 2000 and moving through the last 2 decades. It's going to be very exciting. We're going to cover a film from the list each and every episode that we count down your lists. It's going to be very exciting, but we need your participation. And let me tell you, there's several lists in even just those 6 years where there's some clear front runners right now, but there are a lot of ties. There are some places where whether or not the film makes it into the top 10 may depend on your votes. So please, by all means, go. In just a couple of days, 2000 will be over and done with. And so make sure you go cast your votes for any year from 2000 through 2005, and we'll be announcing next week which film we are going to be covering to launch this series. Nathan, I'm extremely excited. This is going to be a really, really fun time, I think. I'm already eager to get to some of these films.
I know. Man, I am really excited because I don't know exactly where it's going to fall, what exactly the selections are going to be, but at least what's circling the top is going to be a grand old time.
It's funny, too, because like listeners may not remember, you can go back and check our Joker episode to hear the top 10 of 2019, but there are a couple of years where the number one is already pretty clear. Like, it would take a lot of doing for the number one to be overtaken, but there's lots of those lists where, like, ranks 3, 4, and 5 are still to be determined. So, it's going to be really, interesting to see how it plays out. But before we get to all of that, this is the segment that I would normally pitch and ask you, what you watching, what you reading, what you listening to. But I'm not going to do that this week because
you waited so long to do that.
And
yes, you just used it.
Yes,
it was good.
and I'm proud. That's it. Listeners aren't. Listeners are saying I should be ashamed of myself. But who cares at this point? So, but instead, I want to. It's been a while since Meridith has joined us. Last time was for Young Frankenstein. So, Meridith, as our resident literary correspondent and apparently Secretary of Education, that was news to me. But who knows? Who knows what the running mate knows these days? I mean, it's all about
keep up,
all about the
keep
leader.
up, running mate. keep running.
So, but
now, in Meredith's defense, I'm sorry to cut you off there, Reed. In Meredith's defense, so we have attempted. So listeners don't think like, where's Meredith been? We tried a couple times, and then she went and got pregnant with her third kid, which is, it's awesome. Mm-hmm. As we observe it, that you can sort of speak to that, but. It is great to finally have you back on. Hopefully it will be sooner than later that it happens again. But regardless, welcome back.
Yeah.
Thank you.
She's taking her rehearsal for the Secretary of Education very seriously.
Yes.
Intensely. So, no, seriously, we want to give you a few minutes in lieu of a standard watch and read and listening segment to just share a little bit about what you've been reading particularly, but also include whatever you want to about what you've been watching and catching up with. Just have the floor for a few minutes and let us know what you've been up to.
Okay. Well, for those you all out there following the What You're Reading Wednesday post, you know that I'm currently dabbling in graphic novels. Other than that, I'm just putting together my summer to be read list that's growing. But right now I'm reading Lock and Key, and I just finished the first volume today.
Ooh, that's
taken
a great
me a
series.
while. And that's actually what I'm watching also.
Oh, now, so you have started the show?
Oh, yeah. We finished the season.
Oh, wow. All right.
So how did you...
Yeah.
So I have not had the opportunity at this moment. It released a little bit ago as of this recording, but I have not had the opportunity yet. Are you... stay as spoiler-free as you possibly can, but are you happy with the adaptation? Did you like what Netflix did with it? I'm very curious.
I really liked it.
Awesome.
Some people who are really into the graphic novel, I've heard some mixed reviews.
Okay.
But since I actually watched it before I read it, I feel like I connected to that adaptation more than I did the graphic novel. So
interesting.
So I don't know. I really liked it. My husband and I, one Sunday morning, we said, let's just watch one episode. And like 6 p.m. we looked up and we're like, wait, how did this happen?
Wow, that's awesome. That's
finished.
exciting.
Yeah, so
that's exciting.
It was great. I thought it was a lot of fun.
That's awesome. I believe, I'm hoping that I will have a comparable experience because I have read all of the Lock and Key series, but it has been at least a few years since I've read it.
Okay,
So I have not revisited it in light of the recent adaptation, and am considering that I'm probably going to leave it that way and just go into the adaptation with only a loose memory of what the major beats of the graphic novel, and just sort of let the adaptation be what it is.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to go into it. It's very different.
Okay.
The vibe is very different.
Oh, okay.
Which
cool.
I appreciate because the graphic novel is, they can get really graphic.
Yeah, it's pretty dark in places. Yeah, absolutely.
It's really dark, and the Netflix version was dark, but a little more family friendly.
Okay.
Ish.
Cool.
Family-ish friendly. So.
Gotcha. Cool. Well, it's cool.
Well, very cool.
Anything else, or is that pretty much what you've been indulging in?
For fun, that's my fun reading.
Nice. Okay. Cool. That's awesome.
I have some other things that I've been reading that's not so fun, but that's school year reading.
I understand. Yeah, I've been trying to, listeners found out last week, I've been trying to kind of make my way through some Stephen King material that it's been a while since I've read, and some of his new stuff. So you're reading his son, I'm reading Stephen King. So yeah, it's all kind of, that seems to be the tone of the year, I would imagine. So.
You know what? I think I talked about Joe Hill last time. So
yeah, Nosferatu. Yeah.
Yeah, I read more than him, I promise.
So the license plate book.
That's the license plate
book.
book.
Yeah, the license plate book.
Yep. Which also
really
has an adaptation.
On that one.
Oh, man, that's awesome. Well, that has been a special literary correspondent edition of what you reading?
Goodness gracious.
Oh, be prepared. This is not the last time he'll be making an appearance. So
I should hope not.
Yeah. So just
given the nature of this film.
Yeah. So just because I know what you're focused on when we're going into this conversation. I'm focused on the Swedish element of it. We found out last week. What's important to you about Midsommar. So.
Well, I wouldn't say important. It seems important to Ari Aster.
He certainly.
I just enjoy a good movie. If it,
it ain't gotta have a bunch of jangly tooth naked people running around like I'm just saying that's a director
all right,
trademark.
So yes, shall we? I mean, should we wander into the field, the open field, and just
by all means,
let's do it. So we have on our Joker episode, we outlined the top 10 listener voted best horror films of 2019 or favorite horror films of 2019. On that list, towards the top, I don't have the list in front of me, but third or fourth, I believe.
I think third.
Yeah, I think you're right. Was Ari Aster's follow-up to Hereditary, and that is Midsommar. So I'm kind of curious to hear, before we formally get to any sort of trivial bits, I wanted to throw out it's an unfortunate segment given this movie. I was sharing this with Meredith before we started recording that sort of in summary, I think I really appreciate a lot about this film. It's Reed, I even texted you it's an insane film, but I can't help but just respect the artistry at work.
Yeah.
And I've learned, honestly, through our conversation with Hereditary and going through that and I did this when I first saw Midsommar in the theater. I just knew, I'm like, okay, I'm going to watch this once and I'll probably not really know what to do with it. And then eventually I'll watch it again because I'll reserve judgment because I don't know. I through listening to interviews with Ari Aster, I find him a really interesting guy, and he's real thoughtful and smart. And even just the film craft in both of his films so far is excellent. And so I still kind of come away. And for the record, so that listeners know, the three of us are. I think, Meredith, you saw at least the theatrical cut as well, but we are pulling directly from the director's cut, which unfortunately is only available as an iTunes extra via Apple. So a little annoying that you have to get it that way, but that we did all watch that in prep for this conversation.
Yes.
That said, the long-winded way of saying, for me, I'm still kind of like, I don't know what to make of this, but it's just fascinating to watch. And I'm just kind of curious to see kind of where all of us land in terms of what we pull out of it. So
sure.
Round table, Meredith, you're our guest. What would your sort of summary thoughts be as having watched the theatrical and now the director's cut? Just sort of a thought or two on your response.
Let's see, the director's cut. Well, first of all, I'll admit that when I went to rewatch it, I accidentally just watched the theatrical version again.
Oh no! Oh
And
no!
I was like, oh, okay, well, what's different? So I went back today and rewatched the director's cut.
Oh, wow. You
She
are.
is more informed. She's seen it 3
So-
times.
Yes.
I am like,
You
My
drank that
brain
mushroom tea.
oh, I've got so much going on up in my brain. But I really like the director's cut. I feel like they gave us more Christian, which
Yeah.
made us
Mhm.
hate him even more.
Yeah.
They gave us more, what's his name? Mark, who I thought was hilarious.
Yeah. Yeah. Will Poulter. Yeah.
Yeah, and those extra scenes, I feel like it added a lot to it.
Reed, what about your take on the director's cut? It doesn't have to be positioning it against the theatrical. Just curious.
No,
your
of course.
Thoughts.
So I'll answer both questions. First of all, I do love the director's cut. I think if you're one of the things for me is that it's like if you are a fan of this film, if you enjoy this film, if you at all remotely see yourself revisiting this film more than once, I think it is worth it to purchase the film through iTunes so that you can see the director's cut. There's some really interesting things in the director's cut. I think if I were to make a pitch to someone to see the film, I would not necessarily feel that the director's cut was essential viewing. I think the fundamentals of what you get from the film are still very present in the theatrical cut, but I feel like the director's cut does flesh out the characters a bit more. It provides us more context for some of the nuances of the relationships, and there were some things that, of course, I saw the director's cut second, as we all did. So there were some moments that I remembered from the theatrical cut, but I felt like were better propped up in the director's cut. I'm like, I feel like this dynamic is better established. I'm thinking specifically of the toxicity in Danny and Christian's relationship, the tension of the dual theses of Josh and Christian. There's some interesting things that I feel like are apparent in the theatrical cut, but they are better substantiated in the director's cut. So I wouldn't consider the director's cut to be essential viewing, but it is definitely, if you're a fan of this film, it is worth the coinage to pick it up and to check it out. So I was a very big fan.
It's funny you mentioned that the way you did, because random aside here, it reminds me of listening to the commentary or the behind the scenes for Fellowship of the Ring when they talked about how to narrow that story into the film, and that for the theatrical cut, at least, they chose to focus explicitly on the journey of Frodo, and that meant, you can automatically cut some stuff out. Well, it feels like for the theatrical cut, he almost leaned away from I'm going to say this word and it's going to sound like a slight. I don't mean it. He almost leaned away from clarity and leaned into haziness. Okay. Because I remember when I first saw the film and then listening to, I'll reference this a number of times, but the Big Picture podcast had an interview with Aster on July 3rd of last year. And I remember listening to that after seeing the film and him calling it a breakup movie. And I was like, is that what I watched? Not because I was questioning what he was saying, but just I was still so kind of like, I don't know exactly what I've just watched. And to hear him so explicitly categorize it such that way, so that when I saw the director's cut, if y'all remember specifically, like smack in the middle, there's that big nighttime fight scene between Danny and Christian. And I was like, this really, maybe I'm just kind of dumb sometimes when I'm watching this stuff, but that helped me see like, okay, yeah, this is clearly what this is about, as opposed to the initial viewing theatrical cut, which is more like, I don't know exactly where this is landing, and more just kind of hazy, mushroom-induced drug state and out in the Swedish countryside. So no, I would agree with you, Reed. I think that's a good assessment, that if listeners favor the film that they saw in the theater at all of Midsommar and want to enjoy it, like, the director's cut is a really great supplement and worth worth the investment. Let's jump into some trivial bits, because I was doing some reading today, and one thing we just referenced about the cuts is an easy segue here. So I don't know if y'all caught this or read this anywhere, but the first cut of the film was 3 hours and 45 minutes.
Yes, I heard that. Yeah.
That's crazy. I mean, for as wackadoo as this movie is, kind of like my experience or my thoughts listening to the fact that there was going to be a director's cut, I would kind of dig watching that. Like, it's just such an interesting world he creates, and it's very carefully curated from an artistic level, that, I mean, that's a hell of a long time, but I'm not turned off by that idea. It would be kind of an interesting take to see that version.
I think that's a fair point, because I remember when I pulled up the director's cut, because the theatrical cut's like 2 hours and 25 minutes. The director's cut adds about another 23 to 25 minutes to that. But I remember when I pulled it up, and I was thinking in my head, I must have read this earlier, I remember thinking in my head, oh, this is only just shy of 3 hours, because somewhere that 3 hour and 45 minute thing had gotten lodged into my memory banks. And so I was like, oh, this is much brief. I mean, it's still longer than the theatrical cut, but this is much briefer than I was expecting it to be. I was actually kind of buckled for, oh, this is going to be a nearly 4 hour experience, which, unlike The Irishman, which has its merits, but also strains the attention span a bit at times. This is a very it's so fully realized, which is a similar thing that you could say about Hereditary, but it is so this place is so completely fleshed out in Ari Aster's imagination that it is fascinating, and I think I would be down. I can't say definitively, but I think I would be down for nearly 4 hours of this film. It's so captivating. The whole thing is so enthralling to me. I have heard some people complain about like its pacing, particularly in the first hour and a half of it, but for me, I am just absorbed by what I'm seeing. This is such a fascinating little microcosm that they've stepped into, and even I was even more galvanized this time around by knowing where the film was heading, because you can pick up on more of the subtle clues that they give to those ends. Like I had no idea what in the world's that bear doing there, but then when they walk by it this time, I'm like, oh yep, it's a bear. And I know what that means. So it's just I do really appreciate this film, but even more so than that, 2 films in, I think Ari Aster has definitely proven that when his imagination is sort of allowed to run wild, he can craft a really absorbed reality, something that just invites you in, and that is really hard to turn away from, even as you're watching admittedly horrific things.
Sure. Meredith, did you have any specific kind of trivial notes or non-content specific thoughts?
Well, I was just thinking about the pacing also earlier today. I loved the slowness of it, or how one moment can feel like it's lasting forever. And it's like the whole thing was just like a slow build to an anxiety attack. It's like a slow build to it, which kept my attention like the whole time. So I really loved the pacing of it.
Yeah, that's awesome. I one quote from Aster from that interview, and then we can move into other like maybe actual trivia involving the story or whatever. But he said, "I see this as a fairy tale adjacent to horror." He said, "I'm a big fan of melodrama where you take the film and make it as big as what the characters are feeling," which is a really interesting idea that makes a lot of sense. He says this is a big operatic breakup movie. It's got a folk horror framework, and that felt like the perfect structure for what I wanted to do, which was in line with a dark comedy, which is just crazy, right? Like this is what kind of threw me after my first viewing, because the first 10 minutes of this film, maybe the first 7 or so, are wrenching. I mean, it is, and I don't know that maybe I was savvy enough in the moment, because I know Hereditary has very little like explicit comedy to it. It's pretty dreadful,
right?
So I'm thinking in that wavelength, but it's that first 7 minutes when Danny, Florence Pugh's character, speaking of Oscars, who just got nominated for one herself, learns of the passing, the rather awful, terrible passing of her sister and both her parents all in one incident.
Oh my gosh.
It's so dialed up that it does kind of like make sense in this terrible comedy kind of way. You know what I mean? Like, it's not funny at all, but it's so big. It's so over the top that you could be like, okay, it kind of makes sense that we're pushing a giant boulder down into a canyon, right? Like, it's not rolling down a hill. You're just careening down to the bottom. And then, like the people on the mountainside. For anyone who's not going to watch this film, and it could be argued a word for this film is extreme. I don't know that I would necessarily say definitively everyone should watch this, but kind of in brief summary, the story is Danny, this Florence Pugh's character, as I just mentioned, suffers this pretty terrible tragedy at the top of the film, is already plugged into what is a year gone toxic relationship with this character Christian that's been referenced. So they've been dating a year, probably 6 months longer than they should be, but now because of this tragedy get locked in. And so the film then takes this turn where the two of them with several other graduate student buddies go to Sweden on this little journey that, if you've seen The Wicker Man, there's significant echoes of that, though, story-wise isn't exactly beat for beat, but just that kind of idea. You go to this countryside and meet all these people who on the surface have very innocent aspects to them, but as the film rolls on, you learn this is pretty rough.
Maybe not.
Something terrible going on here. So let's just kind of dive in. Reed, do you have any other sort of specific trivial bits before you leave there?
What's fascinating about this film is that, I mean, there are some interesting things to say about the film from a trivia perspective, but most of them just tie into things that I just appreciated about the film. So maybe they'll come up as we progress. There wasn't anything that was just like particularly exclusive to trivia. Most of it is just in and surrounding certain beats or moments. They might come up as we progress.
Well, let me ask y'all this. So, and this can maybe pivot us into kind of general likes, dislikes of the film, but something that's really deft about this script, I think, is so much of the Danny Christian stuff is in the foreground of your kind of connection to the film, that there's so much background stuff. And literally, actually on screen background stuff, but also story-wise. So, as a juxtaposing these two films, Hereditary, the film kind of pivots on suddenly learning you're dealing with this demon cult or devil cult in Hereditary, right? And that changes the film. That's a major sort of tone, or changes your perceptions of the film. Something subtle but similar is happening in Midsommar, and I did not pick up on it until this second viewing. Do y'all? You're both smart people, and so you probably did, but I even posed the question as I was watching it, and then through reading, it was answered for me. Do you get that Pele, their friend, orchestrated the whole thing?
Oh yeah.
They're coming to there.
Yes, and that was. I'm sorry. I'm going to pivot over to Meridith in a second, but no, I actually got that from the first viewing, but it didn't become apparent to me until that final scene where they applaud him and he's crowned with leaves and brush and stuff like that. It was not apparent to me until then, but I remember even in the first viewing being like, dang, this was all a manipulation, like from the beginning. And I remember that being pretty shocking to me in terms of a revelation.
Yeah. I caught it the second time around. I feel like the first time around, I was just still like, what? But I read a theory today that he, maybe he even was responsible for the death of her parents and sister.
What?
He set it all up to get the ball rolling, to get her on the trip.
Wow.
And
interesting. That, who knows? I don't know, but I did see in the spirit of that, what's so fascinating about this film is so little of it is explicit, right? I mean, you get exposition for kind of the mores and rituals and liturgies, if you will, of this community, But even then, there's a lot of just supposition on your part as the viewer, like, okay, I guess I understand what's happening here. But specifically things like, so Josh, who is the other thesis student, when he goes to, when he sneaks away to take pictures of the sacred text, according to the director, it's Pele who jumps him from behind.
Mm-hmm.
Really? Oh,
Yes.
that's crazy. Wow.
And on top of that, I didn't pick up on this. I think it's the gentleman who is so upset about the tree, which is hysterical. By
Ulf.
the way.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
what I read.
Yeah. Oof.
He's
Yeah.
the masked one. He's who's wearing Will's face when he comes to Josh.
Wow.
I mean, just stuff like that. That it's like,
now I
this
did.
is, yeah.
Oh, so I apologize. I didn't mean to cut you off. I did read just
No, you're fine.
In light of trivia bits, I did read along the way that so when Mark has urinated on the sacred tree, and Ulf is the man who's so upset, so disturbed by it. I did read in trivial bits where Mark makes a passing comment there where he says, "Is he going to kill me for that?"
Yeah.
And although it happens off screen, that is what happens. Now, not necessarily for him urinating on him, he probably would have died anyway, but Ulf is the one that kills him, and we discover.
Well, you don't pee on the tree, Reed. Don't pee on
no,
the tree.
No, don't pee on the
I mean-
sacred tree.
Ancestor tree.
Yes, that's ancestor tree, yes.
To the point of the inherent comedy, hiding in plain sight in this otherwise just insane horror show, that scene's hysterical. I mean, the way I don't even mean that lightly. Like, it's actually staged, and Ulf's response is so over the top. It's just you can't help but be like, gosh, this is so wild, So
Right,
I actually
yeah.
really enjoyed that. Let's dive kind of directly into just likes, dislikes. We're sort of circling that. I will say, the back and forth of Danny and Christian at the top of the film, post her family's passing, conjured for me just that the notion of being so grateful to God that I don't have to engage in the dating scene. Like, that
Right.
sounds and looks terrible. The back and forth with them and
Yeah.
with the guys talking to Christian at the pub or whatever it is. Like,
Oh, it's awful.
oh my gosh.
Oh, it's awful.
All the passive aggressive.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Ugh.
Don't
It's
get me
so
wrong.
dreadful.
Like, marriage can be challenging sometimes, but I wouldn't trade my challenging stuff for that.
No. Oh, no. No. That is, and it only further solidifies, like, I don't blame, in those moments, those guys, because they're just ridiculous friends. Like, I don't blame them for having their own whatever opinions about his relationship. But let me tell you, man, like, at the top of my dislikes, though I love the ways in which the film uses him, at the top of my dislikes is Christian. Christian is the worst. He is the unqualified worst of the worst, a terrible human being, deserves everything that came to him. It is awful. He is an awful, awful person. I mean, there's nothing about
Tell
his
us
character.
how you really feel.
No,
Reed.
there's
This
nothing
is
about
strong.
his
So
character
you
that I
don't
appreciate.
like him.
No, I am not a fan. No, I mean, like, it's in that moment, like, I think the first thing that pinged me this time around with him is, I mean, I get frustrated because we as the audience can see what Danny is going through as a character, and yes, it would be a painful thing to have like a breakup or something, or have a breakup conversation with all that she is going through. I can understand a little bit of tension in that regard, but I mean, like, then, like, when she finds out that they're all going to Sweden, and he's like, I'm probably not going to go. I'm probably not going to go. And at that moment, like, dude, your ticket is already paid for. Like, what are you doing? Why are you sitting there being so blatantly deceptive? And then on top of that, I think one of the most heinous things he does in the movie, though it ultimately winds up ironically being beneficial to her, is invites her to come along. Like, that's one of the most heinous things. I can't grasp the level of, like, I'm just going to keep stringing you along. So I'm going to invite you along on this impossible thing that I don't want you to come with me, and I want this relationship to be over, but I just don't see a way, to be honest, so I'm just going to keep on stringing it along. And I'm just like, you're the worst. You're an awful human being. He's terrible.
Well,
He's terrible.
and I do love the scripting in some of those scenes because you just feel it. Gosh, the weight of, their back and forth. And I'm jumping way ahead in the film, but to your point, Reed, about, you didn't explicitly state this, but what I interpreted from what you're saying is about just the character motivations and things like that. Do y'all remember about 2/3 of the way through the film, there's a scene. Creepy stuff has started to happen in the periphery of the group, but none of the main players have been taken out yet. There's a shot of Christian, Danny, Mark, and Josh all sitting at the table, and there's just this terrible, heavy awkwardness between all of them. This is, I think, after Josh and Christian have fought over the thesis. This is while Mark is thinking about the girl he's interested in and is just peed on the tree. This is after Danny is aware of some... Oh, she's concerned. This is it. This is after Simon has left, right? So anyway, I was just so impressed. It's a silent scene. Like, they aren't talking to each other, but there's so much happening just visually in their body language and in their temperaments. And I'll say this, like, Ari Aster hasn't so far told a story that I'm super emotionally attached to. In other words, like, oh man, you've got to see this film because it's so powerful. But from a pure film craft standpoint, this movie's crazy amazing. Like, some of the shots, I mean, and I think part of it is, I don't know if y'all know this from your reading, but they had an extremely tight timetable for the film.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
And in fact, he had to storyboard before Hereditary came out so that he could do press for Hereditary. Well, then he finishes press and they go to shoot. It was actually shot in Hungary and not in Sweden just because of costs. But they had to clear that field. So that field was like, chest high grass. They had to clear that field. They had to build the commune. And they had like, I don't know, I think it was 40 shooting days.
Oh my gosh.
And on top of that, the days are actually shorter. So he made in this interview I referenced earlier, he makes a comment how Hereditary had a shorter daily shooting schedule. In other words, like, the amount of days they had was less, but they had more hours in the day because it was all interior stuff primarily, or night stuff. Whereas with Midsommar, 90% of what happens on screen is during the day. And even then, they only had so much they could work with before the sun started setting or before it was fully up. Anyway, so given all of the constraints that they were working against, some of these shots are just breathtaking at what they pull off. Anyway.
No, I totally agree. Meredith, what's some stuff that you appreciated about the film or didn't like?
I was going to talk about the shots also. When I first read about it, like the first time I watched it, I immediately went to the old Google machine because I was like, what is happening? So, and all I could get really was that it was a breakup movie. That was about it. But I was like, but what about every single step was intentional? Like there wasn't just a basic scene like when they were driving and it was upside down, or
oh man,
all of the
awesome
aerial shots, all of that. So I really liked that it seemed so intentional.
Mm-hmm.
It just made me want to know more.
Yeah, you're kind of making the point I was crudely and unable to make earlier, I think. But it's yes, after watching it the first time and seeing breakup movie, is that what I just watched? Because there's so much to it, but it does make sense in the context of at least the way Aster puts it. A movie where visually you're capturing the height of the emotions the characters are actually feeling, and this big operatic sort of melodrama. And so if you watch it with that in mind, it's hard to do, especially because the movie's so long. But from a metaphorical standpoint, like the journey of their relationship and its disillusion, it's really fascinating. But again, I'm with you. It's a lot of work for just a breakup movie.
Right, a lot. And then I realized, okay, so it's more than just break up. For me, the central theme was codependency.
Sure.
Like,
yeah.
just from Danny's codependency, but also going into this community where they do everything together, from sitting down to eat to breathing to
doing it.
Doing it. Yeah.
Yeah.
To that. So,
They even assist where needed, I guess.
So it's
Meredith,
wild movie.
I promise one of these times you're going to be on The Fear of God where you don't have to talk about something uncomfortable. And
Reed,
like,
you forget that Meredith and I have known each other for 15 years, and this, our family's humor is,
I don't forget that, but I'm part of the conversation as well, and so there's So
sorry, Reed, we'll keep it G for you.
We had the Ash versus Evil Dead episode last time, and then this time around.
That's true.
That's
true.
Good old
I see the point you're
Midsommar
making now.
Oh
yes.
yeah.
Nathan knows that I'm a 12-year-old boy at heart. there really is nothing off limits.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, you are right, Reed. I'm sorry.
Fine. I thought
you were making fun of me for my off-color humor. Instead, you were commenting on the nature of what we're watching. Yes.
No, exactly.
Sorry, Meredith. What else you got, Reed?
So
on the likes dislikes list.
I want to comment about the absolutely pitch perfect, wonderful, fantastic score that the first time around was, I feel like, so masterful you almost don't particularly pay attention to it, except maybe in passing. But during the watching of the director's cut, I was so captivated, and it stood out to me a bit more of just how many times the score accents what's going on, and it's a very deliberate type of score. It's not intended to be. A lot of movie scores can be sort of just subtle strings to accent the mood of what's going on, but this is definitely an overt sort of cultural. I think I had this written down and then I don't have it in front of me, but the composer has a very particular name. Like they have a
Hexen Cloak.
Yes, Hexen Cloak.
I don't even know how to spell it, but I just listened to it today. Yeah.
And so that's something that I feel like, I don't know, we keep talking about the ways that the film's craft, like the way the shots are set up, the way the village is constructed. Every piece of this feels so intentional, which is something we've all said to one degree or another. But this time around, I was really impressed with the musical soundtrack, the way in which it sort of like there's an undercurrent of this whole cultural shift. You are in another world. You're in another place.
Yeah.
This does not feel like, yes, okay, technically this Swedish commune. It's not Sweden. This is a place unto itself. It might as well be an island. Like, it's completely and totally cut off from everything external, which is completely captivating. And every piece of this film points to that end in a very, very, very impressive way.
Well, and interesting to that point, Reed, to back up what you're saying. So he had written Midsommar's script 4 years prior and listened to that artist during the script writing process. And so then invited him to score it and did the exact same thing, but with a different artist for Hereditary. The person he wrote the script to is who he ended up asking to, kind of score the film.
To score the movie. Wow, that's incredible. I made a list of all of the terrible things Christian does. So I'm going to be brief because I've already gone on.
I'm excited about it.
So
you are a list maker. You are.
I've ranked them. So
lackey the listicle, the occasionally listless list making lackey.
Exactly. So number 5 on my list is what I already mentioned earlier, where he's like, I'm probably not going to go, but we talked about it. We talked talking about going to Sweden. That's terrible. So number 4 on my list is his passive aggressive way he kind of coerces her into taking the drugs. Like, just that silent little sort of, because that silent little sort of like, okay, well, guys, I'm going to wait back. Like I'm going to hang back. But you can feel in that scene that it's really about pulling her into it. And that's, and to be candid, that's a really masterful scene, both script-wise, acting-wise on everybody, because it is almost all subtext. Like, the text of it is, hey, I'm going to be in solidarity to my girlfriend and you guys do whatever you want. But you can feel it in the entire tone of it that he is being passive-aggressive and pulling her into something she actively has expressed that she does not want to do. And so that was number 4 on my list. Number 3 on my list is, man, he's sitting there fighting with Josh about, like, he knows Josh was going to do that thesis. It was ridiculous. Like, he's sitting there trying to steal that man's thesis statement. And then when the time came and Josh has disappeared, he serves Josh up like so much like fast food chicken, man. Like, he's got whiplash. He, chucked him under the bus so fast. It's awful. Number 2 on my list is when he pretended that inviting Danny to Sweden was a surprise he meant all along.
That's bad.
That's awful. That's
one's
awful.
bad.
But man, my number 1 awful thing, like, this fool forgot her birthday. And that's bad enough. At least he could have owned up and been like, hey, I forgot your birthday. But what is that bland, flavorless little pound cake he tries to sneak her off and be like...
Where did he get it?
I know.
That's a great question.
What in the world is it? Like, it's this dumb little thing.
It's the proto meat pie.
Well, yeah, where'd he get the candle? Like, they don't have a Walmart there. Like, where'd he get the candle to stick in there and be like, oh, yeah, I'm just going to put this
Do you think they have just like a little commissary? Just a little little general store outside of the
Horgath
general
store. Oh, my gosh, that's it. Yeah, it's... Now,
now listen, you
I need a plate and a slice of cake.
And a candle,
please,
just one candle. Only one. I only need one. Well, what's funny is it's not. It's like a slice of cake. It's not cake. Like,
no,
there's more of that cake somewhere on that property.
No,
like, who did he get it
cornbread.
from?
I mean, like,
where
God.
did he get it? Well, listen, Lackey the Listicle, you have enumerated for us all of Christian's worst offenses in the film.
He's the worst.
He almost makes up for all of it. The actor Jack Rayner in the performance when.
Oh no!
In possibly the least sexy sex scene ever,
Yeah.
The moment when he and Maya are doing their thing, and that middle-aged woman crouches down and starts singing, the look on Jack Rayner's face with drug-addled Christian, it is hysterical. Like, I laughed out. That man is on another planet in that moment.
I don't know what's happening.
Funny.
I don't know.
He is having an out-of-body experience, and it is hysterical.
Well,
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, like, to your point, the scene, I didn't even have this written down, but it brought to mind, like, when he's sitting at the dinner table and he's just talking to somebody. I forget what he asks. He's just like, what's happening to me or whatever. And the guy, like, claps in his face.
What is happening?
Yeah. And when he claps in his face, like, the world just all goes fuzzy. But the look on his face, he's like, why did you do that? Like,
some of his physicality in that last 40-minute stretch is hysterical. And giving Jack Rayner some due here, I actually did find a trivial bit here where originally in the script, when he flees the cabin after his encounter with Maya and all the ladies, initially in the script, he was in the robe, but Jack Rayner suggested that he be completely nude. And in fact, it says Rayner was inspired by having recently watched The Last House on the Left, which I haven't seen. But like many films in the horror genre, female characters disrobed, humiliated, assaulted before their demise. He felt it was a due time that male characters be made to suffer similar indignation. So that's why he's butt naked running through the field.
Which honestly, I do love that choice. Like, I feel like, as uncomfortable as that scene is, and boy, Ari Aster loves to just like populate his films with uncomfortably naked people, but like as uncomfortable as that is, I came across that same bit of trivia and really admired it. I was like, that's such a strong choice for this film and works so well cohesively with everything that I feel like the film is kind of after. I really admired that choice, uncomfortable as it is.
I'm going to throw one more like on the pile before we move into scares, or before I end and we possibly move into scares. Reed, I mean, did your wife watch this movie?
No. She
Okay,
she saw 2 minutes
did you catch
of it,
the over the credits song? Did you catch this?
Oh my gosh, I should have.
At the end credits, it's When You're Without Love, which I don't know if she originated, but I know as a Cher song.
Really?
Yeah.
What is the song?
The sun ain't gonna shine anymore.
You know
The
what's
moon
funny?
ain't gonna shine
Oh my
in the sky.
gosh, I'm gonna.
When you're
Yes.
without love. You know, that one. That one.
So I did not, and I'm going to try to lower my voice so my wife doesn't hear me admit that I did not know that was a Cher song. But
The only reason I know it as a Cher song is because, shout out Team Ned, it features in the X-Files episode Postmodern Prometheus.
Interesting. So I knew the version that they played. I had heard the because there's this big, I believe. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to turn in my music fan card but I believe it was featured on a big collection of works from the legendary and scandalized producer Phil Spector. I believe it was part of a big collection of that. But even if that wasn't where I heard it, I remembered being familiar with that specific version. So I never even connected that Cher had covered it as well. But no, wow, I'm gonna have to let her know. Although I doubt that I will convince her to sit through this movie.
Yeah, I don't.
For the sake of those end credits,
Yeah.
that might be
right. You're like, no, babe, listen, 2 hour 45-minute flick. I promise you, it's gonna be worth it.
Gonna
when you get to the end.
Yeah, and then
the payoff is so good.
the credits start rolling, and it's not even
right.
Cher
It's
singing.
not even Cher.
And she's looking at me like, what am I supposed to do with this? I'm like, no, didn't Cher
Yeah.
sing this song? No, thank you.
Yeah, that's
So-
hysterical.
Yes.
Speaking of, y'all feel good going into some scares? Because I got a list staring at me.
I'm good. Meredith, what you think?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Meredith, name one for us. What was something on your scares list?
The one that stuck out to me the most, I don't know if I could call it a scare or just an extreme discomfort, is the cliff jumping part.
Oh
But
my
not just
gosh.
that,
Yeah,
but the lady, she bounced off that rock.
Oh
you guys.
yes.
Yeah.
What?
You
In
know,
slow-mo.
That's
Oh.
hilarious because that was the scene I called "Please Hammer, Don't Hurt Him."
Yeah.
You know what's amazing
touch
about
it.
that moment?
I can't.
Right. So what's so amazing about that?
on.
This is my point about Ari Aster's attention to detail. Like, someone had to think through the fact that body would rebound off of that rock, right? Like, it's just bouncing.
Yeah.
Now, in the same scene, come on. So, lady jumps first. Is she the one? She's the one who bounces because
Yeah.
my dude next, he knew the whole deal. He knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
And he knew the girl before him didn't just feet first, you know, like
he thinking?
Greg Louganis down. And he still went down feet first. Come on, man. He
That was the
knew
worst.
better than that. Was the worst. Like, how stupid are you?
If you are
Like, he
going,
didn't-
yeah.
He didn't die.
No.
And that's the thing. Like,
What?
if you are
Head
going
first.
to
Head
do
first.
this, yes, you swan dive that sucker. Like, you do not. You do
You
not.
have to commit.
You may bounce, but you won't feel it.
Yeah, don't cannonball. Like, you gotta swan dive. Like, this man, and he doesn't even cannonball. He
You
like does a
cannonball,
pogo thing.
your
Like,
butt's going through your head.
yeah, man. I'm like, good lord. And he and his aim is terrible. This poor man, like, he misses that rock. I'm like, it has all gone bad for him.
He got really confused about what was going on in this
He's
moment.
like, wait a
He
minute.
did not know what he had signed up for.
But you know, the young people with the mallet, they were like, this is our chance.
I've been
Yeah.
practicing for 30 years. It has finally come. Like,
Oh my god.
enough
Guys,
of
he's not
pounding those
dead.
stupid little mushrooms. Now it is the real thing.
Oh my gosh. All right,
Yeah.
let's save scares from the last half hour until a few minutes. But yes, so
Agreed.
the cliff jumping is rough.
Before we leave that,
The
Yeah.
detail.
I rarely do this. I watched this film at home. I missed it in the theater. So the first time I saw it in the theatrical cut, I rarely do things like this where I like just sort of meta information. I did not know going into this what they meant by atastupia. So I had never, if I had heard that, I didn't remember what it was or whatever. So when they say like, "Oh yeah,
so
we're gonna."
dumb.
I'm ridiculous. And then he's like, "When we're gonna have an autostupia tomorrow," and I could tell that Josh knew what it was.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is a moment. So I briefly paused the movie to Google it, and I was like, oh, so. Yeah, so it was not. I mean, it's still an alarming moment when they do all of that jumping, but I had a little bit of preparation rather than just sort of be like, "What are they? Oh my gosh!" But yes, anyway, that ain't right.
Yeah.
That ain't right. That creepy shot of Danny's hose mouth sister in the outhouse when she lights the match. You remember this?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's rough. That ain't right.
No, that's awful.
That was pretty messed up.
Well, and she sees so it comes up a couple of times because she sees in a dream sequence following the autostupia, she sees her sister with that tube thing coming out of the mouth, like in a dream sequence in front of the rock. And I remember how haunting it all was that she's seeing that regardless, but then like the shot lingers from a distance. It's not a close-up shot, but the shot lingers on her dreamlike vision of her sister with that tube out of her mouth sitting in front of that rock, and then her sister like opens her eyes, and then she wakes up. It's a very alarming effect.
Wait, I didn't see that she opened her eyes.
Yeah, so like it's probably like 2 seconds, if even that long, before it cuts to Danny waking up. Like her sister like opens her eyes and looks at her, and I remember just thinking that is nightmarish. That is horrific. It's pretty awful. I have because I had the autostupia scene on mine, but the whole sequence that we've already referenced where Josh sneaks in to read the Ruby Rotter and the Ulf, we later learn Ulf is wearing old Mark mask. That ain't right,
and not much else.
No,
Yeah.
that
like
ain't
Ulf.
right. Well, what's really horrific about that scene is Josh is looking at a shadowy figure that you could presume has at least enough feature recognition that he thinks it's Mark. And then when it gets closer, it's like, oh,
right,
that is Mark's face. That is not Mark. Like, oh my God, that ain't right. That ain't right.
Well, something I actually find interesting about the movie, but this is what I'm talking about, the foreground, background stuff, is like we're so conditioned by movies, we think like this, that when you meet Ruben, you are conditioned by history of horror film to think, oh, this is I'm uncomfortable with them making the disabled character the creepy thing, and that's not really what they do at all. I mean,
No.
it enhances, kind of how the community views Ruben is creepy as crap, but
right.
But he's just kind of there, like he there's, at least that we know of, there's no malevolent intent on his part whatsoever.
No, he is purposed. He's like they even say like he is a product of inbreeding and
right
and that
Unclouded.
yes, and that is almost a revered state. I mean, he's writing their sacred text. Like it's
right.
The subversion going on in this film. Like we don't have to get into too many specifics of the last half hour right now, but I will say it kind of more is appropriate to mention in scares. The Wicker Man, which is a film I love. Meredith, have you ever seen The Wicker Man? We discussed it on the show, but I don't know if have you ever seen it?
I haven't. Well, if I have, it was so long ago, I don't remember.
Okay, I think it's a remarkable film. There's having seen Midsommar first, there are echoes of whichever film you see first in the other one, but I still
That's
consider.
what I heard. I want to see it.
Yeah, I consider Wicker Man to be a remarkable film that, if you have the right palate for it, I highly recommend.
Does love The Wicker Man.
I do. I love The Wicker Man.
The dance around the Maypole.
For all the reasons that Nathan won't mention. But yes, but no, I do love that film. It's a favorite film of mine. But casting that aside, Wicker Man kind of conditioned me to be very, very scared for Danny specifically. So as everything is sort of climbing up, when Danny wins the May Queen, the first time I saw it in the theatrical cut, I am terrified for her. When she wins the May Queen, I'm sitting there thinking, this is going to be awful because this poor girl has been through so much, and now she has been coerced into this cult dance scene. She has won this, and they are going to sacrifice her on some weird sort of ritual thing. And I cannot quite describe. It is a love, but articulating precisely why is a little challenging for me. I loved the way Ari Aster subverted that. Note that she is actually in a heralded position. Now, what happens to her following this, I think one can safely presume she's going to join this commune and perhaps continue to be a revered person within this commune. It could be that immediately following this, all bets are off and she is doomed in a different sense. But that's not what the film leaves. That's not the impression the film leaves us with.
Well, in
the
fact,
film leaves us with a distinct impression that she is going to be just fine.
Yeah, in fact, the stuff I was reading references her now being adopted by the commune. So, that's the resolution of her story, which is interesting. Now, to both of y'all's points, did you catch? They reference Reuben and the inbreeding and use the phrasing unclouded. Well, I don't get the impression, I don't know that we're supposed to get the impression that Pele is the product of inbreeding, but they use that adjective for him at the end. When they coronate him, when they give him his crown that you referenced, Reed, or whatever it is, they call him unclouded? Yeah. And so I wondered, is he in some sort of oracle sort of position as well? But anyway,
fascinating.
Other scares. There's a moment in this film, there's so much film craft that sort of screams artistry. I don't know if y'all caught this. There's a sequence of moments. Who I think is Connie, the scream. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah. Josh is in the chapel. It then cuts to Danny in the bakery, and then it cuts to Mark outside the Triangle building, and each of them, they aren't quick cuts, but it's 5 seconds with each character, and you hear a scream in the distance, but it's never explicitly resolved. And little things like that, I'm like, that's amazing. That is such a fascinating and excellent choice from a film design standpoint.
No, it's absolutely wonderful, and there is so much. I do feel like, it's possible you watch this film, you don't care for it, you never want to revisit it, fine. But if you watch this film and you're captivated, I think it so rewards a second viewing because you catch so many of these things that I think the first time through you're just kind of navigating what's like the outsiders into this commune. You're kind of what's going on here? What is it? I'm captivated, but I really don't know what the substance is. Going in knowing what the substance is, I think it's really rewarding to see the ways in which it's all established from the get-go. This is all very, very deliberate on this commune's part. Anyway.
Well, I think we're officially here, y'all. I mean, the that ain't right of that ain't right. It's time for some hair pie. Oh my gosh!
No swinging dingy. No, it is awful. It is awful.
My goodness.
Yeah, it's terrible. But did you see, and what's funny is I caught it the first time through. Did you catch the connection to the love story thing? I mean, it's more obvious than some of the other things in the film. But the first time through, when I saw that was the situation, and then when he
You mean the
discovers
right?
the tapestry, yeah. And then he discovers what's in his drink, I was like, oh, man, this ain't going well. This ain't. No.
There's two things you don't do. You don't drink the tea. Just don't drink anything they give you. And don't agree to go to a ceremony. It's not going to end well.
No.
No,
it won't.
Just turn around and walk out. Somebody.
Yeah. You're like, you're like, I'm going to stay here and watch Austin Powers with the rest of the kids.
So, although the kids are pretty in on it too. I mean,
they're
that kid almost got thrown in the lake in that director's cut added scene. So let's jump on the That Ain't Right train and just go full steam ahead. Now, my little list here starts with one. Yo, is there anything sexier than a janky-toothed, naked old lady pushing on your butt during sex with a 15-year-old whose pubes you ate? No. that ain't right.
So listeners, so listeners, if you'll rewind 15 seconds, just press the little podcast button and rewind 15 seconds. Listen back to the scene that Nathan just described. If you want to know whether or not you might be interested in this film,
answer that
ponder
question.
Ponder that description that Nathan just gave you, because yeah, that's where this film's going.
Oh my gosh, your boy Christian just needed some help. That ain't right. You know, so
that ain't right.
That's number one. Number two is of that ain't right train. You know, choo choo is running around butt naked and then seeing your dead friend's exposed foot where he was buried, but they didn't even have the decency to fully bury him.
No,
that ain't
right.
Dude, that ain't
like,
right.
So I'm going to be a little jokey here, but I'm kind of being serious about the observation. I think there's a degree into which he has been planted. That has been like
interesting.
That it's been exposed as like being planted for some sort of like as that part of him rots away, that it will sort of in its way nourish the soil. Like that's the impression I got from that moment, because it's in the garden. It's not just like off,
right.
You know, like it's there in the garden. I'm like, man, they planted that sucker.
Or it's like meant to be like a footstool.
Almost. Oh, look, I got a seat. like I'm gonna sit here and read.
I am butt naked and just was traumatized by a bunch of naked old ladies, and I'm just gonna pop a squat.
Take a load off
on
I'm gonna
footstool. Wait a minute, I recognize that foot. Wow. Last but not least,
Simon
is when you.
I know.
No, that's Josh. Is the foot.
Josh is the one who gets planted.
Yeah.
But yes.
That was
Simon.
Josh.
That's third on
Yes,
the list,
Simon.
is stumbling on that British dude who's been mutilated and strung upside down. And then some creepy old dude blowing drugs in your face. That ain't right.
Yeah, but man, the lungs are still working. That fool's
ain't
lungs are still moving. Like,
that's what I was going to bring up also. I didn't catch
go
that
ahead.
the first 2 times I watched it.
Oh,
Yeah, so he was alive.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't see. That's the thing, is I got the impression that there is a degree to which he is still alive because his lungs continue to function.
Y'all wanna hear about it?
Yes.
So, according to the IMDb trivia section, Simon's fate is based on a Viking ritualized execution method called Blood Eagle, in which victims were placed in a prone position. Their ribs, you'll love it, their ribs severed from the spine with a sharp tool, and their lungs pulled through the opening to create a pair of wings. The victim would supposedly still be alive.
That ain't right. That is so terrible. That is so terrible. And he doesn't even get, I don't know how long he's there. He doesn't even get the benefit of going to the barn fire at the end. Like he is.
He is.
He's just
yes,
there.
He is. Yes, he is.
Is he in it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
He and Josh are in the back of the room. They're just chilling back there. Because you can see
Josh,
it.
I thought that was Mark and Josh.
Oh, it
Mark
is
is
Mark.
Mark is the fool.
it's-
Mark has got the jester hat on. Josh has his mouth stuffed with something in the back, and he's sitting across already. Josh and Simon are already in there because you can see Simon's flower eyes. He and Josh are in the back. Simon gets wheeled in the wheelbarrow. Connie gets brought in, and she's all bloated and nasty. Man.
I guess that would make sense because they've selected 4 from their own commune. They've selected 4 new blood, and then the May Queen had the privilege of selecting whether the 9th would be, Christian or if it would be someone from their commune. So I guess that makes sense. But I hadn't noticed that before. I thought literally that he's just up there indefinitely, where I'm just like, oh my God, that's obscene.
No, they
terrible.
They showed him some mercy.
If that's what you want to call it.
Mercy is for the weak. My very last thing is the way the food on the table at the May Queen celebration is undulating. Did you catch that?
Yes.
That is so nasty.
It's so uncomfortable.
So nasty.
Well, because what's awful
Tell
is
me.
it's undulating, but the rest of the visuals are not.
Right.
Like it's one thing if you could kind of if everything about the image was pulsing, then you could kind of say like, well, this is the visual of the drug-addled Christian seeing, you know, like, or this is the visual of, you know, this the hypnotic state in which everything is. But no. Everything else is still as can be, and that turkey on the center is just like massaging, like something is is
so
just
you guys saw
moving
that
in it.
too. I thought there was something wrong with me.
Oh,
You drank the tea, Meredith. You drank the tea.
Well, I
She's
thought
like-
that was part of the director's cut. I'm like, how they slipped me the tea.
she's like, honey, this sleepy time tea is expired.
Oh, my goodness.
Something has gone wrong.
That's like the
Oh, my gosh.
special edition. You know, it comes with a bag of mushroom tea. You know, and you make it and then you drink it before you watch the film, and it's a whole
no.
different cut.
It is.
It's a whole different film.
It's the 4D cut.
Yeah. That upside down camera shot you were talking about earlier, it's all right side up until it's not.
Oh, ew.
Woo wee.
So
Somebody.
Meredith, did you have anything else for the scares measurement or anything else to fear stuff mentioning?
I don't think so.
Yeah, it's all pretty awful. I texted Nathan though. So here's what's funny. I texted Nathan when I intended, cuz listen, y'all, like this film is long, and so I was like, I've seen it before. It's pretty conceivable that I might watch this director's cut in 2 segments. But I was so captivated by it, I just got lost in it and I watched it all in one sitting.
It's like an old lady putting her hands on your butt. She just pushed you further into the movie.
That would not. My experience was in contrast to that. That was not quite. As I was sitting there, I mean, I'm never going to view my couch the same way again. Thank you, Mr. Rouse. But as I was sitting there, I was like,
Fine.
so
I'll finish.
Oh my god.
no. See, I'm going to just trust.
That look on his face is so great.
I'm just. He's like, what is going on? So no, but I was. Oh no. Don't make me bring back the chef. I will bring back the chef. So no, but sincerely, like I got so captivated by the whole film, and I texted Nathan after I was done with my viewing of it, and I said, I do not know if it is just that I'm demented or what, but I love this movie. I can't even quite picture why. And what is so bizarre about it to me is one of the things I love about it. Are you both okay if we pivot into some kind of thematic, some deeper waters, some thematic ideas?
Let's do it.
Yeah.
What I find so compelling and captivating about it. Boy, I will mention this as a sort of comparison to Hereditary. Boy, Ari Aster in 2 films loves to take like a devastated character, and by the end of the film, he has literally exalted them. Like, is her name Charlie from Hereditary? The young girl, and she's just defiled and decapitated, and by the end of the film, she is the return of Payman. Like, she is the heralded one with a crown upon her head. Here you got Dani devastated by that super dark opening 30 minutes, and she's just in dire straits the entire film, and by the end, she is the exalted May Queen. But one of the things that I found really compelling, both viewings through, is I noticed it but didn't understand it when the old man pogos off the cliff, and then they're all writhing with him. They're screaming with him.
Yeah.
And they're and what was interesting is it pinged me the first time I watched it, but I didn't understand it. And then as it progresses through, then they do it again when Dani has caught. I mean, it was a coercive sexual encounter that Christian had, but Dani has seen it. She's witnessed it, and she's in agony because of what she's seen. And as they are collectively in agony with her, like their breathing matches hers and they mirror her suffering. And then as in the end, in the, because listeners, if you have no intention of watching this film, the film builds to something we've alluded to already, where basically this 9-day festival celebration that this commune is participating in culminates in the burning sacrifice in a big wooden building. They're a temple of sorts, they call it, and this temple is populated with 4 of our main character, or 3 of our main characters, our sort of visitors, and the other 2 guests that were there, and some members of the commune. They're all burned, some of them alive, some of them, their bodies are just burned. But the people are outside, and as the screams begin to rise from the temple of the people who are being burned alive, the screams rise up, and the people out witnessing it are screaming with them and are writhing with them. And it really compelled me, this way in which this community, this is what I thought. I haven't got it written down, so forgive me if this articulation is clunky, but the ways in which these people have chosen to share pain is really, really fascinating to me. Now, don't get me wrong.
Well, I mean, I actually don't mean this to be jokey, but it's not just pain they share. I mean, it's kind of just general expression, right? Or emotional.
Yes. Grief, suffering, like whatever that is being exhibited, they collectively embrace it and carry it together. Now, I don't want to don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying, boy, what a great idea, what a great commune. Like I'm not like, oh, these guys have figured out true community living. But I found it very, very compelling. And one of the things that I took away from the film, so here Dani is just sort of lost in the weeds of all of the relationships which she's surrounded by. She's clearly got some tension with her sister, who is bipolar and ultimately at the top of the film kills herself. But then she's in this completely toxic relationship with Christian. And the scene that I did document a bit of is when Pele is sitting next to her, talks about how he was an orphan and that he was adopted by this commune. And then he says to her, I have always felt held. And that is something that really stood out to me. He said, and describes like he's been held by a real family, like a real true family. And he says, this is something that everybody deserves. And then he asks her very pointedly, does Christian feel like home to you? Do you feel held by him? Now, could position in fear, but it's also something that I'm stretching at towards a bit of a thematic conversation, is the toxic relationships and the toxic ways that we navigate those relationships. Meridith, I heard you use the word codependent, leaves us so desperately vulnerable for anybody to swoop in and hold us, and to come in and sort of offer us sympathy, offer us companionship, offer us basically a sharing of feelings and a sharing of just everything that we are going through, everything that we're suffering, everything that we're burdened by, and they offer to carry it and they offer to hold us in it. What is truly nightmarish is that when that happens, Dani spends this entire film ready to leave. She's desperate to get out of this place and is unable to get out of this place until by the end, I think it is pretty safe to say she will never leave. She will be here now forever and actively embrace it. Not that she's like trapped. She's now sort of drunk the tea and she is in. And I was fascinated by the ways in which our own sort of vulnerability in, you can call it a toxic relationship or you can call it a codependent relationship, but our own sort of toxic navigation leaves us vulnerable to really anybody. It's something, before I shut up and pivot over to your responses or thoughts or whatever you had thematically to bring to the table, it's something that we had discussed in brief about the film Let Me In,
the remake of Let the Right One In, which Let the Right One In was a Swedish film. That's fascinating. It's just coming to me at the moment. But so what's fascinating is we discussed in Let Me In how, if we do not offer, if we believers, friends, just loved ones do not offer protection, comfort, security, love, affection, companionship, then something else will step in to fill that void. And that something else may bring with it some dark, more horrific things that we will openly and actively embrace simply because they're the ones who are willing to scream with us or cry with us or hold us. And I found that tremendously fascinating. I don't know if that feels completely far afield of what you guys got from the film or if that resonates at all, but that was one of my big takeaways.
I wrote down that same scene when he was saying he has always felt held. I felt like that was a big takeaway also. I don't know about you guys, but something that was super uncomfortable for me was in the beginning is just how Danny grieves. Just her way of crying. It was so uncomfortable for me to hear in the beginning.
Performance-wise, Florence Pugh just nails that. Because,
it was.
You are totally discomfited by that.
In fact, the second time that I watched it, I had to turn it down because it struck something inside me, and I actually found my mood changing, like I was in a bad mood, and then, but at the end, when her grief was just as terrible, and she had that group of women around her, doing it with her, it didn't bother me. So I was like, well, she has these people. She has this group, and they're grieving together, and it's not going to last. So, I don't know. For me, even seeing her with this community made me feel better. But in the beginning, when she was grieving on her own in that way, it was really disturbing for me.
But it's interesting, the word codependence has come up multiple times, but I think about, so the cult, the commune, cements Danny in her codependency. And what I mean by that is she is crowned May Queen, and then she is empowered with agency, although that agency comes with a high cost of choosing Christian or someone else. But in gifting her that choice, they solidify her enthrallment to them. And it's interesting, Reed, you were dancing around this notion like a May Queen at a Maypole. And I think it's illustrated too in that opening scene. Like, I think a lot about the word interdependence and how easy it can be without properly knowing how to handle our grief and our sorrow to be taken in, and how what seems, because it's interesting, this group, this cult, this commune, whatever, as horrifying as the plunge from above is, there's a moment when the older female elder is explaining this ritual that you're like, I kind of get what she's saying. You know what I'm talking about? Like,
oh, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
It's a great joy for them, as it will be for me. We view life as a circle, instead of getting old in fear and shame. But of course, by the end of the film, I think we are meant to be truly kind of horrified by the rituals this group indulges. And I think what I'm trying to sort of scratch at here, that was inspired by both of you, is in proper faithful sort of living, it's as much alone as it is together. And there's almost, and I would say the marriage of those two ideas is interdependence. It's the ability to exercise agency, to also lean on community, but to, in your interdependency, be able to recognize toxic expression in the community, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what's really fascinating about this film, is because, if you take the specificity of what happens in this film out of it, in other words, ignore the Sweden of it, ignore the sort of otherworldliness of these folks, and just examine the text, which is a woman in grief who has not properly dealt with it, who knows how long was dealing with her sister, who kept her anxious and fraught with trauma, right, by dealing with her sister so much, meets a group that in Pele's sort of luring presents as home and being held, while all the while ensnaring her. And we can get as explicit as we want to here, but that plays out with startling routine in normal life, not in heightened, crazy Midsommar movie life. You know, we on a certain scale are watching it play out writ large, but even just think about the stories. I mean, Reed, I know you grew up in a very specific brand of church. Meredith, I know you've cut your teeth on a very specific brand of church life. Like, the stories I know the two of you could tell of people you've observed, or even maybe you yourself got close to at some point, that was a bear trap. You know? Yeah. And it just takes a level of, it's really interesting. I'm just kind of following some thoughts here, but
sure,
it takes a level of self-awareness and of maybe spiritual awareness also, because I think, at least for me, I think there was very much implicit in my church-going upbringing of enmeshedness, and the group matters more than the individual. And those things can sound like faithfulness from a certain point of view, but are also a very potent recipe for toxicity and destruction, right? I don't know if that's making any sense.
No, it does.
Well, go ahead, Meredith.
I was just gonna say that am I saying his name right? Pele, or is it Pele?
Sure. Yeah.
Pele. Sure.
It's either Pele. I'm not quite sure.
Pele. I felt like, he was talking about a family and being held by a family, but what it was manipulation, and that's not love, and that's not a family. But at the same time, I feel like he was probably just manipulated to believe that it is. So it's just kind of like a cycle, like, of manipulation. Like, that's how he was brought up, and so
right,
he's bringing her into it, but it's not a family; it's being manipulated.
Well, and I think that's so. Man, there's so many things bouncing around in my head because of what you're describing right now. But I think that's one thing that I have always been bothered by, the general logic of. And I'm going to apply this logic very broadly. It could touch on a number of different subjects, but the ways in which we will allow, and I think culturally speaking, this is far more prevalent than, I think it's much more a part of the conversation than it ever has been before. Maybe the attitude itself is not much more prevalent, but it's much more part of the conversation of, this feels right, therefore it must be right. And I've always been very skeptical of that version of, like, path forward. Rich Mullins came up in last week's conversation, and he has a song that is a very silly title. I did not expect it. Man, I haven't even listened to Rich Mullins recently, but he's coming up so much in these conversations recently. Maybe I should just pull open his albums and listen to them again. But he has a song called "The Maker of Noses," and "The Maker of Noses" is a very silly title, but it's got some pretty profound thoughts in it. The chorus said, they said, "Boy, you just follow your heart, but my heart just led me inside my chest." And they said, "Follow your nose, but the direction changed every time I went and turned my head." And they said, "Follow your dreams, but my dreams are only misty notions. But the Father of hearts and the Maker of noses and the Giver of dreams, he's the one I've chosen, and I will follow him." And the reason that that's coming to mind in light of our conversations about the ways that we've been manipulated, is I do think we find more and more ways, and I see it in virtually every social circle where people will just do, there should be Olympic medals given for self-justification, for the things that they have absorbed, embraced, and the things that they have said, like, this is right, this is good, and they'll hoist it up to the top as saying, like, this is the only way, this is right, this is good, and they will usually justify it by some means of felt experience or shared experience, rather than pursuing a sense of critical thinking or a sense of challenge within community, listening and speaking to people who are distinctly sort of other than you, which is always a great exercise in sort of keeping your own heart at bay and keeping some objective perspective on things. But the ways in which this commune has, like, she was manipulated left and right by Christian and allowed herself to be, but then the ways in which you mentioned earlier, Nathan, about how you hear that elder's justification for Atastupia, and where she's like, we don't let our old decay and suffer in pain. They give their life as a gesture. They intentionally just give their life. And in the moment in the film, dadgum if it doesn't make a little bit of sense, like you said. Like in the moment, the way it's expressed, it's like, but then you realize, like, oh, they're talking about this other thing. Like, they're talking about this dramatically sort of, it's very specific, and I'll even go so far as to say, like, it's pretty horrifying. And the ways in which they have convinced themselves not only that this is a good thing to do, but that this is the right thing to do. Sure. And we ourselves. So you said something earlier, Nathan, that I want to hone in on here, possibly as my final few thoughts on Midsommar. I was really captivated, Nathan, by what you said about is a faithful life as much being alone as it is being part of the community. And Nathan, you and I off pod, Meridith, I'll try to contextualize this a lot for you, so if you have any thoughts, you can push back on this. Nathan, you and I have talked off pod a lot about the times at which you are kind of called to stand solitary, like the times at which you are, because this side over here is saying one thing you can't agree with, and this side over here is saying another thing that you can't agree with, and it takes a tremendous amount of strength or stamina to actively and wholly stand alone. Like, that takes a significant amount of courage, and it takes strength. Countless people around the world right now feel alone, and they feel lost, and they feel without community. But to actively stand there in this sort of, like, no, this is... Because she's torn and basically bounced from one side to the other, when in truth, I view as an outside observer that the path forward for her would have been not back with Christian and not necessarily with this commune.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Yeah.
That the path for her is not in either of those two places, but that would require a solitary strength that she does not have the support system either inside herself or outside from anybody else telling her to be able to achieve that. So she's simply bounced from one side to the other. And I find in these days, it is so, Nathan, you and I again have said this in so many different ways, how it would be so easy to just embrace the narrative of this side or that side. You can say I'm talking about politics, you can say I'm talking about social structures, you can say I'm talking about religion, whatever. It would be so easy to just embrace the narrative from that side and just follow that path. That I'll dance in the realm of politics for a sec, like, oh, I'm just a wholehearted liberal and I'm just all the way over to the left, and that's just what it is. I'm just a wholehearted conservative and I'm all the way over to the right, and that's just what it is. But it is a painful place to stand in the midst of that and to try to be both a reconciler, a peacemaker, a whole individual who does not divorce themselves from one school of thought for the sake of another school of thought, but rather is pursuing what we would in Faithful Structures call this mystical third way, this path that is unique and whole in and of itself. That takes tremendous strength. It takes tremendous courage, and it is hard. It is difficult. It might be a version of which, here that I'm not presuming this is can be a definitive statement, but it might be a version of which when Jesus spoke about that the road that leads to destruction was broad and the road that led to life was narrow. That like, hey, this is a bit of a tightrope that
Sure.
you are required to walk here because there is destruction on this path and there is destruction on this other path. For Dani, there is destruction in her relationship with Christian. She is not a whole person in her relationship with Christian. She is broken. She is, I would dare say, to a small degree at least, maybe to a large degree, abused by her relationship with Christian. And then the antidote is not, well, let me just go over to this commune where even if you like some of what they give you in terms of the community aspect, they lure people to their death.
Yeah.
Like they have manipulated people to come from across the country where they will kill them, and those people will forever be missing persons to the world at large.
But, and I'm sorry to butt in here.
No.
But it can't. This just screamed at me. Dani doesn't start with acceptance of the death of her peers. We never in groupthink begin at the worst possible position. That is a steady erosion of our own value systems, of our own better judgment. And I do think there's something really fascinating at work here, that tension, however unintentionally I developed that notion, that tension between aloneness and togetherness. And even Reed, just a minute ago when you were talking about peacemaking and stuff, I do think we're explicitly called to be peacemakers, but as I would sort of articulate what at least I'm trying to express in aloneness, sometimes the mere act of standing alone is the point and will itself yield a potentially prophetic call to peacemaking, not because you're actively trying to be a peacemaker. Does that make sense at all? I understand. Just the retreat from the synchronous voices wailing as you wail sometimes requires you to just remove yourself and recognize this is codependency, this is manipulation, this is wickedness, this is murder in the story of the film.
Right.
But this is one of the reasons I grow in my estimation of Ari Aster each film is like, and why I enjoy these conversations so much is because none of this is not there and all of it was subconscious, but just the ability to talk through and recognize, like, as heightened and as fantastical and as melodramad as this film is, it's also a very clear cautionary tale to, I don't love this word, but groupthink, to uncritical fellowship, if you will. Like, like to me, faithful living is being present and being apart, being present and being apart. And it's living in that tension,
Yeah. Absolutely.
Anyway. Yeah.
Meredith, what you we're kind of winding down now, but I want to give you an opportunity to sort of express either responses to what we're saying or even, bring up some things that we haven't talked about yet.
I'm just kind of soaking it in. Everything you're saying, I'm just agreeing. So I don't have anything huge
it's that
to
mushroom
add to
tea.
it. It just puts me in a good place.
The meal is just undulating. I'm just enjoying the food.
Yeah.
Meat pies for everybody. Reed, do you want to go to the fog meter? Are there any other sort of?
Yeah, let's Let's go. If everybody's good, let's go ahead and take it over to the fog meter, our very specific metric of fear and God. We're going to go round table here. I'll start. Fear measurement on Midsommar. I think when it is horrific, it is terribly intense. But unlike Hereditary, I don't find this film oppressive. It is not the type of film that just hangs over you like a cloud. Part of that is because its aesthetic is bright to begin with, but the horror is of a different variety. Still, I think that the horror that is there is pretty intense. So on my fear measurement, I'm going to give it an 8.
All right. Meredith, you go.
Nathan, what about for? Oh, that's funny. Nathan, you go ahead and go.
Okay. It's funny. I thought you were building up to Hedge, and you ended up going 8. So, I think like the Commune, this film lures you in and makes you feel kind of comfortable with its brightness and its colors, while you don't realize the trap is tightening around your feet.
Sure.
So 8 is a little strong for me. I do think it's not far off, so I think I'm going to go with a 7, just because it doesn't operate in a real traditional rhythm of horror, but still,
right.
The horrific elements are so grotesque and so potent when they happen, that it definitely earns a little higher rating there.
Certainly. What about for you, Meredith? What's your fear measurement on this one?
I think I would go a little higher also, probably about 7 or 8, because I think that it's the illusion of safety is so scary to me. Like the whole place, like you said, it was constantly light outside. It's everybody was in their white clothes and dancing and happy and on drugs, and it's like just an illusion of happiness, and knowing that it was just one of the most unsafe places you can be. I think that's super scary. So I might say an 8 also.
Okay. And Meredith, while we're here, what would you give it for the God measurement, the somewhat substantive elements of the film?
Well, you guys go and let me get my thoughts together.
Okay, no problem. So Nathan, I'll pivot over to you. What do you give it for the God meter?
I think Aster's craft and intentionality and artisanship is so high, and his thoughtfulness. I think it's why hearing it described initially as a breakup film after the first time I saw it threw me so much. I was like, certainly it's more than that. And I do think that's just kind of the foundation stone for what is a really fascinating engagement with codependency. And so I think in terms of just substance and what it's kind of after, even though I don't know that it really resolves it intentionally so, I think I'll stick with a 7 on the substance meter.
Okay. Giving Meredith a few more moments, or a few more seconds at least. It's hard not to, it's the same filmmaker. It's hard not to try to contrast my substance meter of this versus Hereditary, which is a bit unfair. But still, it's the same voice, so it's difficult not to compare it. I don't think there is as much going on in Midsommar as there was in Hereditary. So based exclusively on that comparison point, which I'll admit is a bit unfair, I'm going to give this also an 8 for the substance, the God meter, if you will.
It's so funny. Both times I thought you were about to prep for a lower number than you gave, and I was like, "Oh, okay, that is a very solid number." Right?
I'm just so generous. Is what
you
it
are.
Is I just, I'm just, I'm a giver. Okay, Meredith, what do you think?
Meredith,
right.
What about your substance factor?
Just trying to get my thoughts together. I think what I was having a hard time putting into words is maybe there isn't as much as I'm pulling from, but I would probably give it a 7 or an 8 also, because I feel like I could pull so much out of it because of how much I could relate to Danny in a lot of ways. And I could see, even from like the first time she took that mushroom tea or whatever, and she felt like everyone was laughing at her, or she felt like a burden, or she felt devalued or whatever.
Right.
I felt like there was so much substance in that, and so much underneath all that for her. And then throughout the rest of the movie, just how her kind of her arc and her journey. Personally, I could see a lot, but I don't know if that's actually there. But for me, I'd say an 8.
Okay. Well, and to your point, I think it's interesting. This movie, in a lot of ways, feels very straightforward, right? It's like, the lead female character, you actor person wander around this field and act shocked at what's going on around you. And yet, from a performance standpoint, this really stood out to me specifically in one moment, although it's represented in more than just this one. But there's a moment where in frame is Christian on the left, and I don't think it's Pele, but it is one of the residents on the right, and they're in profile talking to each other, and Danny is between them. And I think Danny has just expressed concern over something. I can't recall exactly what, because there's so much to be concerned over. And Christian gives it a passing acknowledgement, and then I think specifically this is where he's asking about incest to the other person. And the camera is just closing in on Florence Pugh's face. And you can read so much incredulity at what she's experiencing. Like, this isn't right. I'm not supposed to be here. You're supposed to be taking this and me more seriously. I don't exactly know how to get you to see or hear me, but this is all terrible and wrong.
Yes.
And it just,
yes, it's
a long take that closes in towards her face of just all of that being conveyed. And it's just, to your point, Meredith, I mean, she says, kind of all of them do, but her specifically is the real standout. She says so much without verbalizing a whole lot throughout much of the film.
Yeah.
And it's really impressive. There's a lot going on in that character.
Oh, absolutely. Well, that means that we officially give Midsommar, directed by Ari Aster, a 7.5 on the fog meter, which is certainly
Sounds
a
right.
substantive
Yeah.
showing. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
But the perhaps more important and probably more difficult question, Meredith, I'm going to come to you first. Would you recommend Midsommar for people to watch?
It depends on the person. But
Mm-hmm.
I think, I totally would. I think it's a great movie.
I like that pivot. You went from depends on who it is. You know what? Screw it. Doesn't matter who it is. Watch it.
Screw it. People expect certain things from me.
You
at this point. So
you just you just helped them out. You put your hands behind them.
That's right. I pushed them.
So
right on into it.
your insistence upon continuing this visual is somewhat alarming. This is
comedy.
In my ranking of Nathan's repeated
Say
gags. This is pretty low. This is low on the.
I guess
the
it depends
totem
on what you're weighing it against and on. Like, from a funny standpoint, it's quite hysterical. I'll answer the question that wasn't asked of me as far as recommendation, and that is, I find this film mesmerizing. Like, it's fascinating. It's interesting. It's like you could pause the film and just study the frame, right? Of all the little nooks and crannies that are going on. It's so hyper realized from a production value standpoint. There's a lot in it that could be a real turnoff, but I think in general we have smart, savvy listeners who are mature, unlike yours truly, and can appreciate, kind of the artistic nature of it all. And I don't think a casual movie person is going to enjoy this film much at all. But in terms of our people, I think there's a lot to recommend here.
Yeah, I'm kind of with where you both are saying. It's a captivating, fascinating, and mesmerizing film. I would say with the only qualifier that you should be at least able to, if not comfortable with, handling mature content in terms of violence and sexuality. And if you can handle those elements, this is an easy film to recommend. If those elements somewhat unsettle you, then this might not be the film for you. But that's the sort of frame of my recommendation. And that
good call.
That puts Midsommar in the books for us. Meredith, thank you so much for joining us once again.
I know.
Our official literary correspondent. Nathan, as always, thank you so much for having this conversation with me.
Of course.
And listeners, so couple of things. First of all, we are going to be winding down this little mini series of our your favorite films of 2019, favorite horror films of 2019. Next week, we are going to be looking at Ready or Not, which is dramatically different from Midsommar. It's a wonderful film. Skipping to at least my recommendation, you definitely should see it. It's a fantastic, fun, wonderful, surprising film. So seek out, if you have not seen it, Ready or Not. We will be here next week, and I will just leave you with two thoughts: that the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, but not the end of the conversation, and it is, we encourage you to fear nothing else and be on your way rejoicing. All right.
Amen. Thank
See
you,
you
everybody.
next week, everybody.
Thank you,
Hey, guys.
Meredith. Thank you, Reed.
Thanks.
See you next time, guys.
Right. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, but not the end of the conversation. And you can continue the conversation in a variety of ways. Start by visiting thefearofgodpodcast.com for all the latest episodes and news, as well as for merchandise and how to contact us. You can follow us on Twitter @TheFearOfGod, on Instagram @FearOfGodPodcast, or join the Facebook Fear of God discussion group. Special thanks to Jacob Hunt of JacobHuntComics.com for our artwork, to Lee Wright and Reed Lackey for our theme music, and to Tyler Smith and MoreThanOneLesson.com for making our show possible. Lastly, be sure to subscribe to us on your podcast platform of choice, and if you listen to us through iTunes, we would greatly appreciate a rating and a review. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.